So welcome to another episode of the Rediscovery channel, where I and my friend Ivor, we talk about a different topic each time. And Ivor, I'm going to get straight into it. This week, I want to talk to you about something called Stoicism. And if I say Stoicism, is there anything that comes to your mind? Any people in particular?
Yeah, we talked about this before, right?
Yes, yeah.
With what's the guy's name?
With Diogenes.
Diogenes, that's right. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Diogenes the dog, or in Greek, the word for dog is cynic.
Yeah, he lived in a jug for a while, right? Or,
yes, he lived in a jug in the market, and he was basically doing the opposite of what everybody else was doing, which is advice that I've been following recently as well. So, and I think it's good to care not about what other people think, so you can discover what actually is you and what is actually just group think or group pressure.
Yeah, I generally don't care what other people think.
Yeah. Well, that's, most people do, unfortunately or fortunately, depends on what kind of thoughts are their own, I guess. But that is so Stoicism is related to cynicism, and I think both of them have been warped to some extent. So if you think about Stoicism nowadays in a modern context, what would you think about? Like, how would you describe Stoicism?
I think of Stoicism as behaving it in a restrained fashion, not showing your emotions. It's actually a little bit similar to Confucianism, I suppose, in that regard. Also, maybe like for our sci-fi fans, behaving somewhat like Vulcans, where you allow logic to determine your actions and you don't express emotions in front of other people publicly, stuff like that. I believe the title for their movement had to do with a piece of architecture called a stoa, where they would meet, which I think is I think it's a porch, right? I haven't really studied the Stoic philosophy that much. And actually, I would say today in the United States, there's unfortunately not a lot of social pressure on people to restrain their emotions. So we're kind of in that age of.
Let me get into that, because I don't want to, get ahead of ourselves. So I think what I thought was interesting is that you mentioned that it's restraining yourself or not showing your emotions. And that's kind of warped to what the original Stoics were all about. You are more on spot when you're talking about the Vulcan way of where you try to look at things logically, and you try to rationalize emotions, and through rationality, try to live the life that's the best for you. But unlike the Vulcans, well, I mean, I guess we could have a debate about this as well. But the Stoics did actually feel, and they did actually want to be happy and live happy and healthy lives. But the way they thought was that the only way to achieve this was by thoroughly knowing oneself and by only focusing on the things you have control over. So yes, I do actually think it's really, really timely. And to be honest, I did not and still do not know as much about Stoicism as I should, which I think is really a testament to the failure of our education. At least over here in Western Europe, and I'm guessing in the United States as well.
Yeah.
So Stoicism has now become a way to describe somebody that just kind of like, oh, whatever. Maybe, like also the way that you would describe a cynic as somebody that's just negative about everything. This is actually not the way that Stoics looked at life at all. And I want to talk a little bit more about one of the most famous Stoics of all time. And you want to make a guess which one it is, or?
Good question. I'm gonna hold off on guessing. I don't
Okay.
want to look foolish.
Okay, so and I might look foolish here because I'm going to pronounce his name wrong probably. It's Epictetus, and he was one of the biggest Stoics that later influenced probably the most famous Stoics, like one of his students. He described the life of and influenced and taught Alexander the Great. But
Okay.
Marcus
Yeah.
Aurelius is probably the most well-known Stoic of all time. But if you read Marcus Aurelius's book, which I haven't, but apparently a lot of his thoughts, they were written down by himself, for himself, not meant for anybody else. But they were along the same thought process of Epictetus, which is actually not the guy's real name. It's just Greek for acquired or bought, which was his slave name, because his life actually started off in Turkey, what is nowadays Turkey.
Anatolia.
Yes, and he was so he was actually a slave for most of his life. In 55 AD in Phrygia, what is now southern Turkey, so I'm guessing Anatolia. So he was either born into slavery or at some point enslaved. But his owner, Epicktētos, served in the administration of Nero. And because of this, he gave him the opportunity to work for Nero and for the administration, and to really go to Rome and develop his intellect. So that's the good side of him. The other word is also, so this is a long time ago, but they also said that his owner potentially tortured him to the point where he was no longer able to walk properly and was in perpetual pain. So, but then there are also others that say that he just was.
Why did they torture him to that extent?
Yeah, well, that's so maybe he was just cruel, a cruel master. Some people like to hurt others.
Sadism.
Yeah. So, but then others claim he was just lame since birth, and that he had like a version of rheumatoidism, or what do you call that?
Rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that happened to my grandmother. It was pretty awful. It really is a crippling.
Yeah. So So I think it's interesting to think, because if you look at it, he talks a lot about the way of life of trying to control your own happiness and being able to find your happiness in a world that's around you is kind of decadent. So if you think about Rome at the time, Nero, he was a populist to some extent, but then again, he also had the Great Fire of Rome. He was blaming Christians for this and setting them on fire and feeding them to wild animals and all kinds of stuff. So I guess it kind of depended what side you were on. But for a lot of people, they actually supported Nero, but they were, Rome was kind of in very tumultuous times, and so both on the outside of his life as well as on the inside of his life, he didn't have an easy time, and so he actually was able to start following or studying this philosophy called Stoicism that had already been founded 3 centuries earlier by Zeno of Citium. And what was actually quite popular with some members of the elite, which, by the way, were later on driven out of Rome because they were seen as a threat by Nero and his, what do you call it, his successor.
Yeah, that's interesting because, when it comes to the kind of rulers who are demagogues, and a lot of them in general, they don't want really critical thinking. They want people to be emotional so they can manipulate them that way. And appeals to emotions are quite common. And they probably saw it as a bad, something that would be a threat to his power. And by the way, I just looked up
people that are driven by purpose, by self-mastery, that aren't into greed, aren't
critical
into money.
thinking.
Critical thinkers, those are a threat to those were a threat to the elites, which were actually themselves into debauchery and all kinds of other stimulating affairs that so they did. So he came up with this philosophy, and or he worked on it, and he's one of the biggest known voices around it. And that's all about self-knowledge. And so there are two works left from him, or several works. So, but there's the Discourses and the Enchiridion, which basically is Greek for guidebook or handbook for life. And I read this one. It's actually freely available online in an English version that's easy to read. It's a little bit outdated, but it's still easy to read. It's not too much. I'll put a link in the description. It's chock full of wisdom, and basically what it's trying to do is try to use logic to find a way to realize self-actualization. And it's I don't know, it's hard to describe it, and so maybe it's good to go into it. For me, it has some touch points with Buddhism, but it was also used by a lot of Christians, especially some of the stricter reformist Christians, because they liked the message about austerity, self-control, self-knowledge, and these sorts of things. Yeah. But in his own words, some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever are not our own actions. So he was very much focused on the concern of the things we do and the things that we have in our own powers. And these include our own thoughts and actions. And according to Epictetus, the ultimate aim of every man and woman is to live in accordance with the universal harmony of nature. And he believed that we all have a role allotted in life, and we all have our own part to play. And we cannot control the role we're assigned, or what is given to us by fate, but we can control how we choose to react. So in his own words, like, you may be unconquerable if you enter into no combat in which it is not in your own control to conquer. So in other words, you are the shipman of your own fate, of which you have control. So so some of his tenets was that we should submit to our fate and be thankful that we are alive. And that's also something that Marcus Aurelius writes about to himself. He wrote about it. Memento mori, every day. Remember, when you every day you live, remember that your life is ending, and that you will die, because it puts things in perspective. And being happy depends on how closely we follow the way that the gods have ordained for us. So, yeah, he was not a Christian, but he came very close to some of the tenets that you can find in the Bible, using reasoning.
Definitely some philosophical overlap, also with Confucianism, to some degree.
Yeah,
and that's probably something we should also look at more, is Confucianism. Maybe do a video on that too.
Yeah, so he talks a lot about duties, for sure. So one of the things he also said was every individual is connected with the rest of the world, and the universe is fashioned for universal harmony. Wise people, therefore, will pursue not merely their own will, but will also be subject to the rightful order of the world. Yeah, order versus chaos. we should conduct ourselves through life fulfilling all of our duties as children, siblings, parents, and citizens. Yeah, that sounds quite confusing, like something that Confucius could have said, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the religious side is also interesting because, there's also this conduct me, Zeus, and thou destiny. Wherever thy decree has fixed my lot, I follow willingly, and did I not, wicked and wretch, would I follow still. So, it's interesting to see that where some of these old Greek philosophers, they're talking about the gods, and actually they're talking about a god. And you can see that there's some clear, they were very close to where some of the later Christians would end up, of course, without the redemption of Jesus Christ, but still they were on the right track, which I think is very interesting to see that you find that again in Confucianism, Buddhism, and other parts as well. He's been influential among a lot of people in the military, in the armed services, like Marcus Aurelius. But also another one that I've read a book about that I want to talk about later on, a more recent one. I really recommend people to have a look at some of his tenets. Just like with the Cynics, there are all these in the Enchiridion, the guidebook. There are all these tenets that you can follow. They're easy to read, and I think they're especially useful in this time where everybody's trying to get to your emotions, and they're trying to get you down with things that aren't working, that you have no control over. To focus on the things you do have control over. To focus on the fact that the time you have here on Earth is not going to last. It's only a small blip when you think about eternity. To try to focus on the things that you have mastery over, and not to worry too much about what other people think of you. So he has all these tenets, like a couple of like beware the poisons of fortune. How to be content. So, for example, when a man asks Epictetus what kind of man is rich, he answered, he who is content. And he also said, contentment as it is a short road and pleasant, as great delight and little trouble. He is a wise man who does not grow for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. So, I mean, that's pretty important advice to a lot of people, including myself.
It also seems like it would kind of undermine the consumerist culture where they want you to consume product and get excited about next product.
Yes. Yeah. And then I think that's actually also in the Bible, right? This is where you shouldn't be too excited about what you might be getting, because that way you actually end up spoiling it. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're more biblically versed than I am. But he also talks about anxiety and how to deal with it, which I think is something that's rife in today's society.
Oh yeah.
So a practical tip is to vividly imagine that the worst case scenario has already happened. If so, how bad will it really be? So if you wish to live a life free from sorrow, think of what is going to happen as it had already happened. Another one is listen twice as much as we speak. Talks about how nature has given men one tongue but two ears. Yeah, you find that also in a lot of older cultures. He also on decision making, deliberate much before saying or doing anything, for you will not have the power of recalling what has been said or done. But then he said also, when you do it, just go with it. Follow your duty, as the sun does not wait for prayers and incantations to be induced to rise, but immediately shines and is saluted by all. So do you also not wait for clippings of hands and shouts and praise to be induced to do good, but be a doer of good voluntarily, and you will be beloved as much as the sun. So that's also bit of cynicism in there, doing things for yourself and not for recognition. And he talked a lot about duty, how important it is to have to be dutiful in your life. I keep listing them. There's another one about don't anchor yourself to just one hope. So neither should a ship rely on one small anchor, nor should life rest on a single hope. These are all good, solid advices. Don't put all your for example, I was super excited about a vacation one time, and then I put all my hope because life was pretty tough for it. It wasn't, but it felt that way. And then guess what? The vacation didn't happen because something came up, and then of course things feel terrible, and really there's no reason. So this one I wanted to also say as a disregarding haters. As a goose is not frightened by cackling, nor a sheep by bleating. So let not the clamor of senseless multitude alarm you. So yeah, don't worry too much about the riffraff. So yeah.
Blues and greens.
Yeah, friends. It has stuff about like friends above wealth, living a frugal lifestyle, always thinking about death. I already had that. Loving what is your fate, ignoring things that aren't in your power. There's so much stuff in there that really, I wish we would focus on some of these things in school because, these are important life lessons, right? So if you're not going to get a Christian education, which I didn't because I wasn't raised religiously, there's also a lot of other stuff that for whatever reason is being ignored in the schooling system. And I think that's one of the reasons that we wanted to start this channel, right, Ivor? So I thought this was a good topic. I'll put the link down in the description. I think we're going to rattle for a little bit more, but this was the video when it comes to the content size. But if you can give us a like, share, and subscribe, that will really help us out. And please check out the video on Diogenes the Cynic as well. Also a great guy. Definitely worth getting his book and putting it in the toilet or something. Just,
Not in the toilet.
No, in the
maybe
bathroom.
where you use. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, not my first language. But yeah, so it has all these little wisdoms that are so easy to pick up. And I think they honestly going to make your life better. So
yeah, and I think that this stuff and this way of thinking is deliberately not being taught because people that think before they act and who use logic and reason to inform their own views rather than just accepting views that are handed to them, those people are always a threat to the state, always. So if you ever have a state-run education, they don't, they're not going to teach that stuff. It's in their interest not to. And the interesting thing about the Roman society is they did provide all sorts of entertainment to people to kind of keep them, mentally distracted and everything. And like Nero blaming the Christians. Why does he blame the Christians? Well, he maybe didn't like them, but also they were a minority with no political power. And it was still a relatively new religion. So you could say things about them and people don't know any better for the most part. So it's
bread and games, right? It's
convenient. So
even when you're talking about universal basic income, to some extent that's what the Romans had as well, right? People were given food and entertainment if you were a citizen.
In some parts.
Some parts. So that would make you completely dependent. A lot of people completely dependent on the state, which was of course nice. But the ironic thing is that Marcus Aurelius, he lived about 100 years after Epictetus started teaching. He was one of the best emperors that the Roman Empire had. And some of the Stoic emperors that were reigning around that time, they created peace and stability, and they expanded or at least stopped the invasions of barbarians trying to take over the empire. But so yeah, it's interesting how this is seen as a threat to those in charge, but then actually those tenets are what make an empire great.
Make a society strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, yes. So you're going to sell out your own. You're gonna, on the short term, you're gonna be able to consolidate your power for yourself. But in the long term, it means that your society and your children, or maybe even yourself, they're gonna feel the consequences of how you're trying to enrich yourself and how you're trying to grab more power. So it's yeah. Anyway, interesting. So pretty foolish, if you ask me. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, it's foolish assuming that you care about long-term sustainability. I also think that a lot of people just took the Roman Empire for granted. Like, this is never going to fall. This is the way it's always going to be. Like, they used to call Rome the Eternal City, but how many times was Rome ransacked eventually?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I take it for granted, for a while, but do nothing to maintain it, and eventually it will stop working. And that's true of a lot of things.
Yeah, it's
Your
true of
car.
society today as well. Like we just always assume that we are the best and final generation.
Oh, I
And
don't
then we
assume.
have it all figured out. A lot of people do, I think, and mainstream people do, and that previously people were just dumb.
Uh,
And then you find out actually, well, a lot of people in the old days, they also thought about the same things and they made some of the same mistakes. And many of them were actually smarter than we are nowadays, because we are basically just trained monkeys to keep the lights on, and to keep, we're just smart enough to do our whatever job we have, our office jobs or sales or whatever. But we're not really given the true knowledge that would actually make us masters of our own fates, because they don't want us to have that. But
right.
you know.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I could probably talk about this for hours, but I want to keep this one a little bit short, because I do have a life, and I also want to focus on some of the things that I do have control over, like the Stoics would have said. And yeah, again, I'll put some links in there in the description. Please let us know, give us a like and subscribe, and let us know if there's this is content that you think is useful. And with that, Ivor.